You're listening to We All Wear It Differently, a podcast for early career psychologists. Your window into the world of the psychology profession. And now your host, Amy Fellman.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 64 of We All Wear It Differently, brought to you in collaboration with the Australian Psychological Society as part of Psychology Week 2020. This year's theme is pain, finding the way forward with psychology. And in today's episode, I chatted to Damien Stewart, sports and exercise psychologist and owner and director of Room 23 Psychology. Damien came to psychology after a 19-year career in the emergency services sector. He has played and coached sport at an elite level, including a semi-professional softball career in the USA for over a decade, and he has his own experiences with pain. Damien's journey has led him to where he is today. For more information on Damien, check out the show notes. Before we get into the interview, the APS has provided WowWid listeners with a 10% discount code for a 2-hour introduction to pain management training module developed through consultation with Australia's leading experts and researchers. So go to psychology.org.au/we all wear it differently and use the code WowWid to redeem your discount. And now for the interview. Let's see how we all wear it differently with Damien Stewart. Damien Stewart, welcome to We All Wear It Differently. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start by you telling me how you first discovered psychology. What got you interested?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. Hopefully I can do it as short as I possibly can, but I've told it a few times now, so I should be able to summarise. But basically, I wasn't always a psychologist. I was a police officer for 20 years before becoming a psychologist, and also played elite sport for many, many years as well. But so getting to that specific question of why psychology, well, I guess what happened was I was with the WA police for 10 years, and then I decided to join the federal police probably after the first Bali bombing and after 9/11, and the AFP were expanding, and I just moved from Perth to Sydney to join the federal police, and probably about 4 months of being in, just before Christmas 2002, I started getting this pain in my knees, in both knees, and it was a bit odd to me because having been an athlete, I'd broken bones, I'd pulled muscles, I'd had strains and inflammations, and I knew what all those felt like, and this was something different. And I was just about to go on a close personal protection course, which is sort of that bodyguard type work, talking to your hand and the thing in your ear. And it was very physical, and it was a 6-week course. And I got onto that. I started to fall out on runs. I couldn't go for certain runs and physical activities that were being done on the course. I remember one day I had to walk up one flight of stairs to get into the apartment I was staying in Canberra, and stopped at the first landing and thought, I don't know if I can make it the rest of the way because of my knees. And I eventually got through the course, and thought I'd injured myself somehow at work and put in a work cover claim, and it took about 4 or 5 months, but I had every test under the sun, poked, prodded, bent, blood, scans, and the orthopaedic surgeon eventually said to me, I don't know what's wrong with you. I can see there's something wrong with you, but I don't know what it is. I think you've got arthritis. I was 30 years old, and I looked at him and said, but I'm 30. And he said to me, well, let's get you off to the rheumatologist and let's find out. So off to the rheumatologist I went, and she did the same poking and prodding and checking of scans, and said to me, I think you've got what's called seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. And I said, well, how can I have that? I'm 30. And then you start to learn a lot about arthritis, that it's a young person's disorder. It's not necessarily an older person's disorder. She said to me that this particular form of arthritis was hereditary, and my mum has it, but she wasn't diagnosed with it until after I was diagnosed with it. So that was quite interesting.
Oh my goodness!
And yeah, so it affected my knees, and so once again, getting back to your original question, I was standing in front of the rheumatologist. She says to me, right, what I want to do is bring you back in a month. We'll drain your knees of the fluid, put some cortisone in, start your medications. And I was literally in her doorway. She was kicking me out. And I said, well, hang on, I'm due to go back to America in 2 months to play softball like I have for the last, 6 years. When can I start training again? And she just looked at me and said, you'll never play sport again, and you need to find a new job. I'm like, well, what? And so probably right there is
I just need some space for a minute. So you're standing in the doorway and she drops that
yeah,
on you. That
yep,
is incredible.
yep, yep. My whole life changed in that moment.
Sorry, I missed that.
The good news is that well, probably the good news came a lot later, but I found another rheumatologist who said to me, yes, that's what you have, but I'll get you back playing again, and etc. So which he did, but before that, I believed her quite vehemently that I wouldn't be able to be a police officer anymore, and I had to start looking around for something else to do. And there's some usual things that police can walk straight out and end up in, usually investigations in another organisation or something similar, but I didn't want to do any of that. And I remembered back when I first joined at 18, 19, and I was at university doing a social studies, a diploma of social science, majoring in police studies course. And in my naive way at 18, sort of looked down the list of recommended minor studies. And sorry, my Siri's talking to me.
She's always listening.
She's always in the background. And I remember seeing on this list of minor studies, and one was addiction studies, and I thought, oh, addiction, drugs, police, right? And the next one was psychology, and I remember looking at that, and it was between those two. And I ended up going with addiction studies, but always remembered that I had an interest in psychology. And probably over the next 10 years, I thought to myself, I'd really like to study psychology. I'd really like to study psychology, but now I had a reason to. And so I enrolled and did Psychology 101 in 2004 was when I started my undergrad degree. So
wow,
that's the beginning of, that's the
just the reason to. Sorry. So
yeah.
The reason to was what? The fact that you'd been told maybe policing is not the career for you anymore?
Yep.
Or was it something more personal?
Yeah, it was that I didn't like what the picture looked like for what police usually do if they leave policing, and I wanted to choose something for myself, and I wanted it to be sustaining, and it was something that was a great interest of mine, and now, I mean, I guess there's sort of an interest, and then there's necessity, if you like, and I always felt like the study was a matter of necessity. It wasn't a matter of wanting to, or perhaps, or let's see how it goes. It was very, very necessary for me, and anyone, and probably most of the people who've listened to this know what it's like to go through undergraduate study and etc. But if we fast forward to today, I guess some of the things the original rheumatologist said were probably inaccurate, and there's a lot to learn from that as a psychologist working with pain. But fast forwarding to today, I mean, like I said, I was able to remain a police officer for the next 9 years after that, until I was able to make the transition out of policing to psychology. But 2 years ago, my knees really started to flare up again, and was going through the new rheumatology drugs and those sorts of things. My knees weren't getting better, and then we did an MRI and found out that I have moderate to severe osteoarthritis in both knees. So I have the rheumatoid and the osteoarthritis in both knees. And my dad recently looked at a photo of the x-ray of my knees, and my mum's 73, just had her second knee replaced, and he said my x-ray is worse than hers. So so it's sort of come full circle. So the decision to change careers has been a real blessing in disguise.
So in your journey, you had that horrible experience with that specialist when she said, essentially your future's over. In that time, so you went to study psych, but like you said, that's a long journey, like from undergrad to actually graduating and then building a career. In that time, did you have experience with treaters, be it pain specialists, or psychologists to support you through that big transition? And if you did, how did they impact you?
Well, I ended up finding like I said, the first thing I had to do was find the whole approach had to change because, we're thinking that there's a structural problem in my knees, and there wasn't one. There was a rheumatology issue that there's nothing you can do really about except for take lots of drugs. And I think one of the things that you learn in that period is that a lot of people just tell you to stop doing everything. And the actual opposite is correct, is you need to move. You move it or lose it when it comes to arthritis. So I did stop. Well, I was told by that original rheumatologist to stop doing everything. And of course you do. And then you start to put on weight, and then you start to isolate yourself, and, and you're in pain, and, you start telling yourself that, I'm buggered here. But it's not not the case, and you got to find people that do really understand it. And it was really the relationship I had with my rheumatologist, who was back in Perth, by the way, who was also a sports medicine doctor, Dr. Ken Maguire. I'm on the Sunshine Coast now, and believe it or not, this is where he operates now, on the Sunshine Coast, completely by chance. So I've started back seeing him as well. So I think that there's a lot of I could go through a lot of stories from back then, but the one that I probably don't discuss that much, and I don't mind discussing it, is there were some very, very dark times during that journey that I probably don't want to talk about too much. But so I did certainly get some help, and if I think back on it now, probably the journey I went on from a psychological point of view mirrors probably the type of work that I do now with my clients, which I think we will probably get to a little bit later on. But yeah, there's a lot of learning from that. Very, very dark times. Very dark times.
Okay. Yeah. Feel free to share anything in this interview. We'd love to hear whatever you're comfortable and happy to share. So I'm just the beginning of your training just sounds like such a intense time for you. The dark periods that you're touching on, but you persevered to complete your studies. Were you ever kind of confronted with thinking, how am I actually going to support other people when I'm feeling like this? This is so hard.
Yeah. I guess I was probably more concerned about supporting myself at times than anything else. But, there's also a piece in here, which is probably by the time I'd finished 20 years of policing, I was probably cooked by then as well. There's probably some burnout being experienced, depending on what you believe, and I believe this strongly, that any police officer that has been a street-based police officer for 5 to 6 years is probably experiencing some symptomology of trauma, whether it's actually impacting their life or not. So there's a point at which I think policing has a limited career span, and I certainly reached mine, and off we went to when I left, I only left policing when I was accepted to masters, and so I guess I had faith that I was going to be able to help others, probably more of a concern about whether you can help yourself or not at times. But, I hope that, as I've said to a few people recently, I spent, 20 years developing some skill sets that I never thought I was going to need in life, So I guess that's what a little bit of life experience before becoming a psychologist gives you.
What are those skill sets that you identify now so powerfully in your work as a psychologist?
Geez, that's a hard one. The reason why I say that's a hard question is it's usually something that other people identify that you don't realise about yourself necessarily. And other people say, well, geez, I didn't know that, or how did you know that, and you're sort of like, well, it's implicit. It's not necessarily that something I cultivated, if that makes sense. So, I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer, but I just think life experience. I think particularly, another thing I sort of say to people sometimes when I'm reflecting on my psychology career is that, I've lived this life, and life's come full circle where I'm now, my 3 specializations are things that were so important in my whole life. So, not that it was necessarily designed this way, but, I was an elite athlete and I'm a sports psychologist. I've experienced chronic pain and continue to experience chronic pain, and 50-60% of my clientele are chronic pain. And, I was a police officer for 20 years, and as much as when I left it, I said I'd go nowhere near it ever, ever, ever again. I'm probably about 30%, 40% of my clientele now are police, and I'm the convener of the military and emergency services interest group. So it's funny how life follows you around. So I guess that's where bringing every time I work with a police officer, I've had the experiences that they've had. People with chronic pain. There are definitely people out there that've got chronic pain conditions worse than me, but I at least know how it has an impact on your life. And of course, having been an athlete, athletes, there is something about definitely police and definitely athletes that want to know that you've had some experience with what they're experiencing. And so it's more that, I've had police officers that just say, so you used to be a cop. Yep, you're it then. Or you might want to just check to make sure that we're a good fit. No, you're it. So it's some of the small things, like when they talk about a search warrant or they use an acronym or something like that, where I just go, oh, yeah. Whereas perhaps with a psychologist hasn't been a police officer, they have to say, well, what does that mean? Or what did you do then? Or what does that entail? And sort of there's a flow, I guess, just from having those shared lived experiences.
Mm-hmm. So you chose, or you describe yourself as a sports and exercise psychologist. Did you plan on also specialising in chronic pain when you started out there, or has that just sort of been an organic thing that's presented because you're in that space?
Yeah, absolutely did not plan to work in pain whatsoever.
Okay.
It's I'll still remember walking. I did my master's at UQ and University of Queensland, and I remember walking. I was going from one class to another and walking back towards the sports psych building, and one of the supervisors on the program stopped me in the middle of the car park and said, "Oh, Damien, your next placement, we're going to send you off to the pain program. There's this sort of a famous pain program that a lot of people were going off and doing. I'm going to send you to that." And I remember thinking to myself, there's one other placement I absolutely didn't want, and that one was probably number 2. So, but it was the best thing I ever did. Absolutely, the 100% best thing I ever did was go and work on that pain program and see how pain program worked and deliver the psychology that was delivered on there. Probably of all the training I had in my master's degree, that was probably the best and the best experience and the most learnt, most practical experience that I had on my whole psychology journey, I think. So I guess I learnt to work in the space and I learnt to enjoy it. Yeah.
Which is really interesting to me, because the idea for a lot of people of working in that space can be quite daunting, and also a sense of that, even that word chronic, it can make people go, that just sounds so hard. But for you, you say you were inspired and excited. So what was it about your learnings in that placement that got you excited?
I think there's something that, there's things I learned that you can do, I think that, I saw that people were actually making a difference. And I saw, I guess when I think about it now, what flashes into my mind is a cognitive dissonance between people who have chronic pain, or as we like to call it these days, persistent pain, has a little less of a severe connotation. The language we're trying to use is persistent pain. And the blockages in the clients and the knowledge that actually existed that could actually help people to move forward, but they didn't know about it. And a lot of people with persistent pain or chronic pain, they're really stuck, right? And I think that does scare psychologists away from working with chronic pain. But the one or two that you could grab hold of who sort of the light bulb went on and thought, I'm not done here. There are some things that I can do. I think that really worked for me, and really, we, depending on what you believe as a psychologist, I believe that our life experiences lead to problems with mental health rather than we just get a mental health problem and end up having problems. So, chronic pain is a reason why people end up with mental health problems. It's so they'll have depression. Chronic pain is what caused it. Some people have depression because a relationship broke up, or they have depression because of their childhood, or they'll have depression because of, they didn't get the right Christmas present, but people with chronic pain, they have a reason, that's their reason for having depression. And so it's very well known, so it's kind of like post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that's always interested me as well, which is that you know where it came from very distinctly. And then that's what you're battling about. So chronic pain, you sort of know what the issue is, and so you know what you're dealing with. A lot of people get very stuck though.
Yeah, and I can imagine is it a bit like investigative work in the sense of, I imagine for a lot of clients they'd present and they might not have necessarily made the links or have not been kind of willing to name the links that, it's this pain that has then led to all these other problems, because you rightly say they can just feel so stuck. So is it kind of a bit of an investigation in terms of kind of getting to the roots of what's actually gone on?
Yeah, maybe not as deep an investigation. I think that the uniqueness of the investigation with people with pain is really about them bringing their personality and their life experiences to their experience of pain. So we don't all, if that makes sense. So, I think one of the things that often gets a client on board is they come in, and the psychological signs that go along with chronic pain tend to be fairly similar. So, if a client is sort of struggling to get across to me, well, so tell me how this is. They'll tell me their pain story first, how they got injured or how their pain developed, and that's interesting. All right, now tell me how that's affecting you in your life, and they kind of struggle with that a little bit. Because one of the things we should back up a little bit is one of my regular experiences is that I'm not someone who they see first. I'm someone that they kind of see last. So they've seen the pain specialist, they've seen the doctor, they've seen the surgeon, they've seen the physiotherapist, the exercise physiologist, maybe the occupational therapist, and then they're sort of, I'm in there as well. So the first reaction a lot of people have that have chronic pain is, why am I seeing a psychologist for a physical injury? And you might need to spend 20 minutes on the phone with them before you even meet them, convincing them that there is a reason, or convincing them of not the reason, but the benefit of psychology to chronic pain. And
because they typically referred from the other specialists, is that how?
Yeah, for me it's for me it's generally a pain specialist, a couple of pain specialists up here on the sunny coast that refer people, and or their GPs who get to know that you work with chronic pain. And I work very closely with a large physiotherapy group up here as well who refer to me. So there's a lot of talking to people about, why they're being referred to a psychologist for a pain condition. And a technique I've sort of developed that seems to work a little bit is people sort of start out with, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with work, and, I'm not sleeping very well, and, I'm a bit grumpy. And then I say, well, you have problems with your concentration and memory? Yeah. You having relationship problems? Yeah. You feeling like you don't know what to do with your future? Yeah. How did you know? How do you know these things? It's because everybody experiences them when they experience chronic pain, and it sort of gets you on board a little bit. And then you sort of, those things that I've just rattled off, including sleep and all these other issues, the grumpiness and the anger and the frustration and the disillusionment and worry about the future. I said, these are all psychological. These are all issues that a psychologist can help you with. So, and they go, oh. And so you're telling me that other people experience this too? Yes, they do. This is normal. Oh, thank Christ, I'm not going crazy then. That's what I hear a lot. And in that way, strangely enough, and I'll inject this here, is that my experience with chronic pain clients and my experience with people with PTSD are very, very similar from that point of view, from a lot of points of view, actually. Okay. They're very similar. They have very similar presentations when they come into the therapeutic arena. So, So yeah, there are a lot of the times that people sort of know that something's going on for them, but they can't point to what it is. Police officers
Okay.
might think that it's just too much shift work, or they're too tired, or they just need a break, and it's full on post traumatic stress disorder. So yeah, they present very, very similarly, and being able to normalize it in that way because you've had experience with it helps. It. I literally hear people say, "Oh, thank God, I'm not going crazy then. This is normal." Yep, completely normal. You're okay.
So are the similarities the fact that they're both so pervasive in terms of their impact that people sort of start to lose a sense of what's the origin of what's actually happening? Or is it because it's so hard to explain your experience when it's so foreign to other people around you?
There's probably a few things. I think that there is not a single, sometimes a single origin, but there are reasons. There are very easily identified reasons why this is happening. I think that some people with chronic pain, the incident that led to their injury, that led to their chronic pain, was traumatic, like a car accident, or being assaulted, or something like that. So a lot of the when there's a crossover of chronic pain and PTSD is usually from a car accident. And sometimes, as I said, once in a while I get a victim of an assault or something like that. So, but generally it's quite a traumatic injury. I mean, even an athlete who pops an ACL or something like that can be quite traumatizing, from that incident too. And sometimes the medical procedures that follow a significant injury are very traumatic, which is what I tend to find that people, a lot of people might not literally, if I work with an equestrian athlete who's fallen off a horse, broken their arm, we'll talk about literally getting back on the horse. But the issue is not getting on the horse. It's if I hurt myself again, I've got to go through that, and that. So it's quite interesting how that trauma works. But I think one of the reasons that make them very, very similar between pain and trauma is the biological function. Trauma is dealing with threat, and pain is a threat signal. So the brain is interpreting it in a very, very similar way. The brain doesn't seem to distinguish between, someone walking towards me with a gun and the potential for someone bumping my broken arm. It's a threat, is a threat, is a threat, is a threat. So we have the same brain functions going into fight or flight and those sorts of things. So I think from a biological point of view, that's where the two of them are very, very similar.
Okay, yeah. In terms of persistent chronic pain, I know it has a huge social impact on people as well because they feel like such a burden, or like they can't talk about it, or the people don't understand it. What are the biggest challenges in terms of kind of supporting people to get over that, that perception that no one understands me, or that I'm a nuisance? And is that might not be a fair kind of, but that's what I've.
No, I think it's it's definitely fair. I think from a psychological point of view, and definitely everybody in the team that I work with, from the multidisciplinary team, they rattled off all those professions earlier. We don't work in one place. We all work privately, but we work together, if you like, which I guess is one of the benefits of living in a regional area.
Yes.
There is this very strong
chronic pain, that space.
Sure. Oh, you have to. But we all sort of work very, very closely, and you have to do to work with chronic pain has to be a multidisciplinary approach. It has to be. And sometimes if I've got a client who work cover is cut off from physical therapy, or I start to tear at the walls, because what am I supposed to do on my own? Because the psychological problems are because of this injury and because of this pain. And give or take, a psychologist might not have much of an impact on that pain, whereas an injection or a medication or a physical therapy, you've got to be working together, because the psychological problems are coming because of this physical pain. And if the physical pain continues, or the injury continues, then the psychological problem is going to continue. So the first thing to keep in mind for anybody who's working with pain is you have to believe your client. You have to believe them, and you have to tell them that you believe them. Too many times people are told, "Oh, it's all in your head," and literally it is, and that's for a different discussion, I suppose. But that does not mean that you're not in pain. All right, so it's very, very important that people know that you believe them. And I can give you a story of a particular client, and this one really taught me a lesson. Is he had a really bad injury where he popped a disc out in his back. It literally dislodged, and he had to have surgery to have a discectomy and cut a little bit off it. But he lost function in one of his calf muscles because the nerves had just sort of shut down from his back because they're impinged, and he had this surgery, and it took him a long time. It took probably 18 months, close to 2 years to keep coming back. He was a very fit, energetic young man with a wife and children and young children. I listened very, very carefully to what reports I'm getting from doctors and surgeons, and they're all saying he's fine, he's fine, he's fine. And we know that people become very tentative when they've got an injury or they've got pain. They think, because of course pain is a threat signal. Stop doing what you're doing. But we know that we kind of got to push through that to get a little bit better. Under medical guidance, everybody, okay? But he was coming in over this journey when the doctors were saying that he was okay, and he's saying, "But Damien, something's wrong. Something's not right. Something's not right." And so I'm getting this mixed messages. I'm getting the messages from the physio and the surgeon saying he's fine, and I'm getting messages from him saying I'm not fine. And right at the end, the work cover said to me, "Look, we just want to throw him on a pain program somewhere just to finish off his treatment before he goes off work cover." And I said, "Well," and I recommended the one I was on when I was at university. And he went in there, and the first appointment, the pain specialist said to him, "When was the last time you had an MRI?" And he said, 18 months ago. I said, "Right, well, from what you're telling me, something doesn't sound right. I'm sending you off for an MRI." Within 2 weeks, he was in having a full another back operation where he had his spine fused. So everyone's saying that he's fine. The client saying I'm not fine, and I'm hearing him, but I'm getting this dissonant message elsewhere. So it showed to me you have to listen to your client, right? You have to listen to your client, and you've got to make sure that they are with the right professionals too, which is something I've sort of thought about this morning as I was thinking about this interview, whether to say it or not. But it's a very difficult thing when you're working in this profession where you know who the right people are to deal with people, and if they say X, you believe X. When you start hearing maybe about a medical professional or an allied health professional who you've not heard of before, and the message that the client is getting across to you that doesn't sound like the norm, what do you do then? And how do you potentially gently recommend getting a client to move from that professional to a professional that you know and trust? That's a tricky thing to do. And it might even, as I'm saying it, feels arrogant to even say it, but there's many times where getting the client to move from one professional to another professional saw them improve remarkably very quickly, or at least find out what the real issue was, So, it's a difficult one. I mean, even with me though, lately I've been having a lot of problems with my Achilles tendons, and my podiatrist says it's because of this, my physio says it's because of that, and my rheumatologist says it's because of something completely different. So these are three people who I trust immensely, and they all have a different opinion as to where my pain condition is coming from. So having said all that, I don't think I actually answered your original question, to be honest with you, which was about how with clients that feel like they're a bit useless, and in some ways
it was that
they
sense
are.
of okay.
Yeah, in some ways, it's difficult to say, well, no, you're not, because they literally can't do some of the things that they used to be able to do. And I see that there tends to be a bit of a gender difference with men and women when it comes to this. I mean, the experience of pain is the experience of pain, but when we have these gender stereotypes, they do tend to come in here. For men, they want to be tough. They want to be the man who they bring home the bacon, they put the food on the table, those sorts of things. Now they can't go to work, right? They can't fulfill what they see as their function in life. And one of the most difficult things I've seen for men is, they'll go shopping with their wife and, they've got a whole bunch of shopping bags and they literally can't carry them, right? And so they're walking alongside, they're I'm 6'3", they're 6'3", they're 100 kilos, and they're walking next to their 5'5", 55 kilogram wife, and the wife's carrying all the bags and they're not, and they feel emasculated by that. Yeah. For women, it tends to be the stereotype or gender typology of looking after the children, cooking the dinner, taking care of the household. When they can't do that, that's extremely distressing. Where do I enter the world if I can't do that? So a lot of the times it's trying to help people to find a way that they can be helpful, to remember that that person that they see themselves to be is still there. It's just in hibernation at the moment until we get this condition right. So I think it's to empathise with how they feel. If someone's literally not able to do the things that they used to be able to do, it's a bit pointless telling them that, nah, you're great, you're completely fine. Well, yeah, that really sucks that you can't do that. Let's try and find a way that you can enter the world,
Yeah.
And so this is where the big word comes in, is acceptance. And that's probably the biggest thing that you're trying to help them with.
When you said, like you could argue they are a bit useless right now. I felt this sense of that feeling of being validated by somebody. If somebody's finally just saying it like it is, which is exactly what you're talking about. So that first step in acceptance, so that then they actually have that space to move forwards, or So I just want to come back to that question I asked before about that sense of being that kind of being a nuisance or annoying people, because the pain is always there and pervasive. How do you work with your clients when they feel that with all the people that they're around? Do you give them a language to use? Do you give them techniques to cope differently?
Yeah,
and I'm talking about,
your question is
people in this experience. Yeah.
I mean, the question you're asking me makes my brain go in about 10 different directions at the same time, because it happens all the time. And generally, what you start to hear from clients is they start to stay home. They won't go out. They won't interact with people. And when you really come down to it, is they don't have any new experiences to tell people. Everyone else is talking about their day, their week, their month, the holiday they went on, what they did at work this day. Well, I watched another Netflix show today. They don't have new things to tell. And sometimes, people get sick and tired of being asked how they are. Like, they're like, I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of my own voice talking negatively all the time. And you can challenge them with ideas around, well, these are your friends. Don't you think that it's really in their head most of the time. It's not other people. It's them becoming self-conscious, it's a projection. It's how they're feeling about themselves, that they think that everybody else thinks the same thing about them. And that's where that's where I tend to spend a lot of that time working, is with your projecting. This is how you feel about yourself. It's about you coming to terms with yourself. It's about you accepting yourself as you are right now. We don't necessarily have to accept that this is the way that you're always going to be, but this is the way that you are for now. And the more that you can accept that, the better off you're going to be. And it's about helping people to learn to get on with their life despite their pain. That's a line that I use with clients all the time, is how can you get on with your life despite your pain? It's something in the background, not in the foreground anymore. How do we find other interests? How do we find things you can do rather than things that you can't do? And I also talk about, another line I like to use is that, we can very easily feed the beast. So if we are feeling poorly about ourselves, that people aren't interested in us anymore, they don't want to hear our story anymore, they're sick and tired of it, so I stay home. Well, I just magnify that tenfold, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger, because it just becomes my whole world, and the walls start closing in. So you have to actually do the complete opposite to what your natural inclination is to have some sort of quality of life. Get out there, be around people, Go and learn a new hobby, do an online course, whatever it takes, read a book, whatever it takes, to start having, getting out there and getting your brain functioning and your body moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, getting over this hurdle, I guess, or finding that space of acceptance, and so you can invite new experiences into your life. I want to come back to that and ask you about treatments, but I just want to get a picture first of who you see in your private practice, because we're talking a lot focusing on sort of chronic pain, but I know you see a lot of people with sports injuries as well. And you've said to me a few times that pain is pain is pain. So I just wanted to get a bit of a picture of that.
So, generally pain comes from an initial injury, so chronic pain will come from an initial injury that just hasn't, the tissue's got better, but the pain remains. And if you look in the literature on physical pain, it's still a bit of a mystery to everybody as to why this pain persists when the tissue has actually resolved itself. But a lot of the time, it's the comparison is an athlete who is injured and has to spend time out of sport, but then there's a worker who's injured themselves and can't go to work. They're very similar things, and once again, people bring their personalities to their experience of pain. Some people might relish an opportunity to have a month or two off of sport or off of work, to have a bit of a break, but a lot of people have very high work ethics, and because they have a high work ethic, and because their work and their sport gives them so much meaning, not being able to be involved, that they just lose a whole bunch of sense of meaning in their life. They've got nothing else that fulfills them in the same way. And with athletes, they feel like they're letting the team down. Workers feel like they're letting their job down, their business down, their government agency that they work for feel like it's letting other people down. So I think I might have got off track from answering the question that you asked me, but generally it's, and sometimes the pain or the injury is not actually caused by the original injury. It might be because of surgery. They've had an original injury, and then having the surgery is magnified or maintain the problem that they have. So there's a lot of dealing with that as well. But it's really about, people can get very depressed very, very quickly when they're not able to engage in things that have meaning in their life, whether that's playing sport, whether that's going to work, whether that's putting food on the table for their family. They lose that meaning, and they lose that fulfillment. Things go downhill very quickly.
I just keep thinking back to the beginnings of your study and career as a psychologist, and I just wonder, you've experienced all the things that you're talking about so intensely in terms of sport and career. Does that ever bring stuff up for you that's sometimes hard to deal with or manage?
No, it doesn't, because how do I say this? I guess the way I want to answer it, I don't want it to come across as sounding arrogant, but I try to say to people in the most humble way I possibly can, I'm an example that things can turn out not only well, but better.
Yeah.
I'm about to write a piece
Bonus.
for bonus. Yeah, I'm about to write a piece for the Society of Existential Analysis in London, and the title of the conference is "I Didn't Expect This to Happen," and the title of my talk is "The Worst Thing That Turned Out to Be the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me." And so, if we start to turn to concepts of post-traumatic growth within the PTSD framework, that's what we're sort of talking about. How do I make the most of this? I'm still me. I didn't lose me. And there's a part of my journey that I felt like I didn't have a choice. I just had to take it. And I think this is where this is when I said earlier that we bring our personality to our experience of pain and injury. Is, if someone's a perfectionist or they've got a high work ethic, honestly, in the pain space, we want to nurture that, but we might need to wind them back a little bit, right? So yes, we want you to be able to move, but for the first 6 weeks, to 12 weeks when you've had shoulder surgery, you're going to be in a sling. And the best thing for you is to do nothing. So we have to wind them back a little bit. There are people that are inherently, for want of a better term, lazy. And so they'll bring that sense of laziness to their experience of pain and injury. We need you to do your exercises to get better, and they won't do them, And so I guess if you've got a personality that's aligned with striving in life, then you'll bring that to your experience of recovery as well. I guess that's a word we haven't used so far in our talk today, but that word recovery is very, very important, to have an eye towards that. And getting back to my concept of, when I talked before, well, not my concept of acceptance, but the concept of acceptance, I make this deliberate delineation between what I call an active acceptance and a passive acceptance. And so what a lot of clients will argue with me about, when we have a very good conversation about this, is paying clients who hear this word acceptance, what they hear is give up. And that's not what is meant by the term acceptance whatsoever. And that's why I make this delineation between an active acceptance and a passive acceptance, which is, a passive acceptance might sort of look like, okay, whereas an active acceptance would be like, right, this is the way it is. What are we going to do about it? And that's, I know that's part of my personality, I suppose. Like I said, I want to say this as humbly as I possibly can, but there was as dark as things were with me, it was like, well, this isn't going to be my life, and you just, and I think it was at times unfortunate where people would say to me, oh, you're making a career change. Well, that's so courageous. Or you're studying while you're working full time. That's so courageous. And the word courageous just really grated on me because I saw it as necessity. I didn't see it as, look at me, everyone, I'm so brave. It's like, well, I don't have a choice here. Existentially, you would say that even if there isn't.
Writing my questions. Sorry,
go on here.
No, it's just even when I was thinking about my questions for you, I was careful of my words because you do tend to just fall into those words, don't you? So courageous, so brave, and it's like, well, maybe the person doesn't actually feel that. Maybe they would have preferred it a different way, but that's just how it is.
And sorry.
It's hard, isn't it? There's so much to say all the time. No, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I just reiterate that it was like dig in and follow the process. It was not like, look how brave I am, or everyone look at me. It was like, geez, can this be over, please? Can we just get to the end? So it's and this is where I guess I tend to still think that coping is a really good word in psychology, whereas the word resilience gets tossed around a lot more these days. But an active coping process is very, very important when we're dealing with these things.
So that word recovery that came up before, that can also have a whole lot of meaning for people that may feel that that's not even possible. So is it right in sort of saying that you do use that word recovery, but that's going to look very different for each person?
Yeah, recovery, rehabilitation.
Yeah. And so it's how do we want that? How do we want your recovery or your rehabilitation to look? Is that how you use those words?
Yeah, I probably don't use them that much. Probably rehabilitation is used more in the active process of going to physical therapy or physiotherapy, doing exercises at home, getting, doing your water aerobics and those sort of things, or hydrotherapy. The recovery is probably a word that doesn't get used a lot when it really comes to proper chronic pain. Interestingly, as I sit here and reflect on it now, there's a particular condition called complex regional pain syndrome. I'm not sure if you might have heard of that, or your listeners might have heard of that before. Have you heard of that before?
I haven't heard of that before.
So complex regional pain syndrome, or as we call it, CRPS, basically the thing that probably explains CRPS the best is that there was a scale done by a researcher that wanted to understand what the worst pain you could experience was. And on this pain, I can't remember the name of it. If I was to go and Google it, I'd probably come up with it. But basically, basically they said that complex regional pain syndrome is the worst pain that you can possibly experience. It's on the top. The next highest level of pain that somebody can experience is an amputation. And then below that again was childbirth. So they put complex regional pain syndrome up there as the worst pain condition anybody can experience. A lot of people refer to it in the literature as the suicide disease. And it is a condition that is inexplicable, and there is no cure for it. So there is no recovery necessarily for people. And this is where I talk about, from a psychological point of view, the way I think about chronic pain is, in the back of your mind, of course, you always want your client to get better, but what does better mean? Or what does a successful therapy mean with somebody that has a chronic pain condition like CRPS? We're talking about 6 to 8. When you got it properly, we're talking about 6 to 8 out of 10 pain, 24/7, 365 days of the year. Do not pass go. Do not collect $100. And people regularly talk about just wanting to cut their limb off that has it. I have 2 clients at the moment I have one client who had it really bad, where your skin would just start to blister and there's no reason for it to blister. And his whole arm up to his forearm at one stage, he looked like a burn victim. And that's just a pain condition. That's just his nerves not working properly. And going to the hospital and them not recognizing what's happening, drawing a line around his bicep and saying, if it continues up to there, we're cutting your arm off. When what he needed was antibiotics and rest and etc. So, so these are conditions that don't. The first thing you think about them is, you are learning to live with this. It's not going away. And a lot of the time, the client comes in and they'll say, "Oh, when I get better," and in the back of your mind, you're like, "You're not getting it." It's not going away. And so there's sort of like these 2 phases to therapy, where it's, they're like, "Yep, if I just do all the right things, it's going to go away." And you're like, "Okay, I just now have to sit here until they recognize it's not going away." And this might sound really pessimistic, but this is reality. So when you're thinking about success as far as a therapeutic encounter goes, success might be maintaining a low level of mental health and well-being, rather than bringing somebody into a thriving sense of well-being, if that makes sense. So if our midline is here of good mental health, maintaining a level that's below ideal might be successful therapy. And you've got to, and I think that learning that early on was beneficial for me.
Oh, that sounds like taxing work for you at times. Just hearing about it, I can't imagine that sense of kind of despair that those people experience. Do you have a story of perhaps, how you've helped somebody make space for that in their lives and reframe their journey and what their life's going to look like? And look at me, I'm
I probably
a positive story, please.
But the positive story is that they come to therapy and they get therapy and they keep coming and they haven't killed themselves. That's positive, right?
Yeah.
That's a positive therapeutic experience, right? But I do have a client at the moment that I reflected on straight away when you asked me that question. He's a man who had and this is something else that probably we haven't spoken about yet, is when it comes to chronic pain, there's an emerging amount of research, but also in your own one-on-one experiences with your clients, you start to recognize people that have conditions like complex regional pain syndrome have experiences of early childhood or early life trauma. So there is something in which our nervous systems are being affected by early experiences of trauma. Maybe I have a confirmation bias at times, but generally when I'm working with a client, I can go into their background and they'll generally tell me something where I go, that's it right there. This particular gentleman had a childhood experience of sexual abuse. He'd grown up with some of the more typical things we'd see of somebody who's become has recovered from that or survived that, I should say. Alcoholism, drug use, anger, difficulties with employment, multiple relationship failures, etc. And now he's got complex regional pain syndrome. And it's really, really bad. And, he came to me, he didn't trust me, he was angry, he didn't believe that psychology was any good whatsoever. And it took a long time of, he would really show some transference and anger at me at times, and he's really testing, right? Really testing. And for one of the first times in my psychology career, because I'm 6'3" and 135 kilos, I don't get too worried about people, but he was somebody that just sort of made me sit back in my chair a little bit, but just the process of sticking to the process of working with someone with chronic pain and understanding him and him coming to terms with this was his condition and learning to accept it. He'd engaged in splitting between all the multidisciplinary team, etc. Now he's like a pussycat, but he's learnt that we're here to help him. He's learnt that we believe him. He's learnt that we understand the condition, even though we've not had it, we understand it the best we possibly can. And there are ways that you can live a life that you want to live if you're prepared to start to change the way that you see some things. And one of the first things so we start to talk about some of the things that he has learnt to accept. Him and his wife, who, by the way, is a tremendous support to him. And we should say that social support amongst chronic pain is incredibly important. But she was also a mental health nurse, so that helps as well. But they bought a block of land in Tasmania, and they were going to retire to the block of land in a number of years. And they were going to build their retirement home, and off they go. He recognised through therapy and talking it through that he wasn't going to be able to build a house. He wasn't going to be able to work again. So the first thing was he decided to retire. So some people say, well, geez, that's negative. But for him, that was a really good move. Instead of fighting, how do I get back to a career? How do I keep making money, etc.? He decided to retire, which kicked in a whole bunch of superannuation things, etc., etc. They sold the block. I can't build a house anymore, so I've sold the block. They found a house in the same town that they were going to build their house in that fit all the bills. They took the sale of the block plus the superannuation, bought this retirement home. And then they're moving down on the 8th of December. So it's about, so you can see how he's kept parts of himself in here, but just made a slight change to be able to make it work for him under the new conditions. So it'd be like saying to someone, well, I can't play golf anymore because of my chronic pain, but you can get on a buggy and go around with your friends on the golf course. Right. So some people won't do that because it reminds them of what they can't do. But for him, and the other thing was, you come in and he'll say, now his mantra for me is, you taught me, Damien. I'm like, oh, okay. But his mantra is, you taught me about thinking about the cans, not the can'ts. Okay, great. If that's what you've picked up from the work that we've done, fantastic. And then the other thing he says, because he's a pretty angry man, he says to me, I'm going in the shopping centre and people run into me and they're not looking where they're going, and I blow up. And the security guards have to come over and all that sort of thing. And it's like, righto. He said, so how do I fix that? I said, well, and by the way, they had to move one house because a lady was blowing smoke that was coming into their window, and he went out there and confronted her and went up one side of her and down the other, and the police came over, so he decided to move rather than stay there. So he's a pretty angry man, right? So he says to me, well, how do I deal with that? And I said, well, I think it's about mental preparation. He said, well, tell me more about that. I said, well, the same as an athlete. We're getting an athlete ready to go onto the field and be able to execute from the moment that they walk in. If you're walking into this shopping centre thinking to yourself, the first person that runs into me, I'm going to punch them out, well, that's what's going to happen. But if you prepare yourself that somebody might run into me when I walk into the shops here, and I don't want to be punching anyone out, or I don't want to be blowing up at somebody, I should be aware that I have a propensity to do this, so therefore I can stop myself from doing it. And so that was another small example that he's been able to take on. So, from the existential approach that I practice, it's not for me to fix my client, it's for me to remove the barriers to growth so that they can heal themselves. So giving him these tools, but the thing about him is he's willing to implement them. Because he's willing to implement them, he has a better experience of life. He's still got CRPS and he's still got it really, really bad. But we'll go a whole session where he won't even mention his CRPS anymore, but probably the whole session has been a 6 to 8 out of 10. See? So to me, that's a positive therapeutic outcome for someone with extreme chronic pain.
Thank you. That's such a powerful example. Hey, we're getting towards the end of our time.
Sure.
Can you believe? So I want to know from you, and it's clear to me just in chatting with you why this work is so rewarding, but do you have anything else to add there? Perhaps if someone's listening thinking, I'd really like to get into this space, what drives you so much? Why is this work so rewarding?
Sorry, I had a little bit of internet problems then. Sorry, I think you were asking me what advice would I give to somebody that wants to work in the space. Is that right?
But I was asking from personal perspective. I'm interested in why this work is so rewarding for you.
People need help. I guess and this is a way that I can help people. It's the chronic pain space is somewhere where not a lot of people. There aren't a lot of psychologists out there working with chronic pain, so. Being able to help people that need help is something that's quite rewarding for me.
Mm. Oh, and you did go a little bit quiet there too. Do you want us to repeat that last thing you said?
Yeah, sorry. I don't really know where we got it, but I think rewarding for me is that there are people who need help, and this is a way that I can help. I think that's and it's become a bit of a niche. I suppose, or a specialisation, whatever we're allowed to call it these days under APRA laws. But it's become something that I'm recognised for, I suppose. They're the kind of clients that get sent to me, and for me, there should really be no difference for us as psychologists whether we're working with an elite, famous athlete down to someone who's a blue collar worker and hurt themselves, lost their eye to a nail gun. So. Every human being should be treated the same, and these are people who need help, so we help them.
And what's exciting you about the future at the moment?
About the future in the world, or about myself?
Oh, let's stick with you, because I think we'll talk for far too long if we talk about the world. Although, don't get me started. For me, it's I think COVID has probably helped me to develop something that I've wanted to do for a long time, which is writing, I suppose. So I've wanted to try to find a space to start writing. The COVID has given me the space to do that because I'm commuting 90 minutes less a day. When I get home, I'm not so tired. I'm already home. I've probably got my sneakers on, so all I have to do is change my clothes and head to the gym. So doing the writing is something I'm really excited about. And a little bit of a self-indulgence here is I've always been interested in military history. And in 2018, I went to do a World War II tour of Poland and Germany and spent 14 days in Poland and Germany looking at World War II sites. And to be honest, at the time, I had no interest in Poland whatsoever. It's quite embarrassing for me to say, but since I was there in 2018, I've been back twice and developed an enormous interest in the Holocaust and Polish resistance during the Second World War. And a lot of people, and I do a PhD on the topic of saviours of Jews during the Holocaust. You've frozen that last minute.
Sorry, you've come back. Sorry, I missed that first part. Sorry.
No, you just froze in that last minute. I heard PhD.
Right. So something that's a lot of people will say to me that the Holocaust is such a dark topic. What are you doing? Because it's become a bit of a hobby to learn about. So I do a lot of reading on the whole project. So it's not just the Holocaust that I'm interested in, but I'm very, very interested in the Polish resistance and the saving of Jews during the war. And
I heard that bit. And did you say you're going to do a PhD?
I want to.
Oh, amazing. No, so that was just the PhD bit. How awesome. That's very exciting.
Yeah. So we're trying to, I've got.
You there?
Sorry, what was that? Oh. Yeah. I can hear you.
You said that there'd be internet troubles, and it's held out for us for this long, which is amazing.
Must be the time of the day.
A little blurry.
Yeah. So we can't see the future. Yeah. So I've also during COVID, I've got a couple of Polish professors, and I've got an Australian professor who's interested in supervising. So what I'm looking at is what makes a person do something so courageous. So people say to me, where's the psychology in this? And to me, it's all psychology. So these people talk about people like Irina Sendler and who saved 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto, and Witold Pilecki, who volunteered to go into Auschwitz and create an underground movement in Auschwitz for 2.5 years. I mean, we should never use the word courageous for anybody ever again. And it just happened in this one place. So for me, it's about that experience in World War II. It has shown us the complete gamut of human behavior from the absolute worst to the absolute best. And I want to try to understand the best. And so we'll probably look at it from a moral psychology point of view, particularly with the way the world is going at the moment. We need to learn about the goodness of human beings, not the worst.
So watch this space.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other thing which is a plug is I've put together, and during COVID I've developed a business plan to take people over on a 16-day tour to show them the Holocaust and Polish resistance during the Second World War as well. And now we're just waiting for COVID to finish so that I can do my first tour. So looking forward to that.
You're blowing my mind here today. It's, when I put notes up about you on the website, I'll definitely ask you for info about that too, because people are interested in everything. It sounds awesome. I've got one last question for you, Damien.
Sure.
If you had your time again, what would you like to have known earlier in your career?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think when I was thinking about this question earlier, my original answer was "You're doing fine!" ! I think that it would have been nice to know that you emoji, you're doing fine. Yeah, I think would have been nice to know, because we all experience that imposter syndrome. I think, and you wonder whether you're doing the right thing or whether you're doing it well, and whether you're actually helping people. So it would be nice to have someone to do that. I think two other things is that. I probably haven't and probably still underrate the value of previous experiences in life outside of psychology and how helpful they can be to our clients. There's we come across the ethical difficulty of self-disclosure as something that people will frown on. And I have to say, and maybe I get myself in trouble by saying this, but I've found that self-disclosure can be incredibly helpful to clients. They can see us as these all-powerful beings, and to know that we have our frailties and that we've been through very similar things to them, it's a tremendously powerful thing. I'll have clients that'll start therapy with me and say, well, have you been an athlete before? Well, let me tell you a little bit about my sporting experience, or did you know that I used to be a police officer? Oh, I didn't know that. And it changes everything. And, Ernesto Spinelli says that we should only use self-disclosure in two ways. One and always is to help the client. If it's in the benefit of the client and not for your own therapy, then it should be okay to disclose a little bit about yourself if it's going to help the client. So in my experience, disclosing a little bit about yourself has been incredibly beneficial to my therapeutic work with clients. And if I was to give one tiny little tidbit, which might be a little bit more funny, would be learn about digital transcription. So, getting your notes transcribed rather than having to type them out it has been a boon for me.
I love that. That's a nice comic note to end on. Damien, Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with me today on We All Wear It Differently. It's been a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Damien. You are an inspiration. I hope you enjoyed the podcast as much as I did. For more information on Damien, check out the show notes. This episode of We All Wear It Differently was brought to you in collaboration with the Australian Psychological Society as part of Psychology Week 2020. For more information, head to psychweek.org.au, and to subscribe to the podcast, head to weallwearitdifferently.com.
You've been listening to We All Wear It Differently. Subscribe at weallwearitdifferently.com.